This voice is artificial, but the ideas are real. Welcome to AI Podcast. Now, let's begin.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are undertaking a truly massive and important exploration. We're plunging into a pretty dense stack of sources that sit right at this, volatile intersection of criminology, psychology, and at the end of the day, personal survival.
That's right.
We're moving beyond the headlines and sensationalism to ask a really fundamental question. Is the violence and crime we fear the most truly random and senseless, like we always hear?
And that's precisely the heart of our mission today. The sources we're looking at argue, and pretty forcefully, that no, crime is not random. It's predictable. It adheres to a kind of dark calculus.
So dark calculus, I like that.
So we're going to take you on a journey from these high-level academic frameworks, the major theories that try to explain why people offend, like rational choice theory, situational action theory, right down to the immediate, everyday skill of staying safe.
Okay.
We'll get into some of the neuroscience behind violent behavior, and then, and this is the critical part, apply all of that to the most potent prediction tool you have, your own intuition.
I really appreciate that intellectual movement because it links the abstract analysis of a statistician to the gut feeling of a person walking alone at night.
Mm-hmm.
We're moving from macrocriminology to micro-survival. To start this journey, though, we have to establish the intellectual landscape. And that means addressing the classic debate in the field. Is crime fundamentally an act of opportunity, an act of calculation, or something else entirely?
Indeed. We have to start with the classic opportunity theory paradigm, which really shifted the conversation away from just looking at a criminal's past and instead focused on the immediate context.
And this is best represented by something called routine activity theory, or RIT.
That's the one.
Okay, let's unpack this core idea. So RIT essentially argues that a crime is what? A confluence, a chance event driven by three specific things coming together in one place and time.
Exactly. It's a convergence. RT posits that a crime occurs when you have three necessary elements. First, a motivated offender.
Okay, someone who wants to commit a crime?
Second, a suitable target, a person or a thing that's worth the risk. And third, and this is key, a lack of capable guardianship.
So no one around to stop them.
Right. And this model was pretty revolutionary because it gave policymakers a tangible lever to pull. Instead of trying to psychoanalyze every offender, they could just focus on hardening the target or increasing guardianship.
It sounds incredibly neat, almost like a perfect equation for crime.
Yeah.
But if I'm reading the sources correctly, that very neatness is also its major weakness.
It is.
Criminologists have some serious problems with RITs, right?
Yeah.
Specifically how underdeveloped those core concepts are.
They do. The major persistent critique is that RET fails to adequately and clearly define those three things. Motivated offender, suitable target, guardianship. It doesn't really explain their complex relationships.
I see.
And crucially, it leaves the role of individual differences largely unexplored. It just assumes the motivated offender is a constant, but it doesn't explain how that motivation translates into an actual physical act in the moment. It lacks what's called an integrated action mechanism.
And it just falls back on these vague ideas of crime being self-interested and rational.
Which is exactly why rational choice theory, or RCT, steps in to try and fill that gap.
Ah, yes, rational choice theory. This is where we stop treating the offender as, just a product of their environment and start treating them like a hyper-efficient, if morally bankrupt, mini-economist calculating risk versus reward.
That's a good skeptical way to put it. RCT views crimes as purposive, deliberate acts. They're committed with the intention of benefiting the offender.
And benefit here isn't just about money, is it?
Not at all. That's vital to understand. It can be excitement, a thrill, sexual gratification, or even, social status and reputation within a certain peer group.
Okay.
The offender is supposedly weighing the perceived gains against the potential costs, arrest, injury, shame, and the perceived likelihood of those costs actually happening. If the chance of getting caught seems low or the punishment isn't severe, then the crime becomes a rational choice.
But wait a minute. If someone is highly impulsive or maybe driven by a drug addiction or just pure rage, how can they possibly fit into this model of cold, calculating rationality? This seems like an inherent mismatch with the reality of so many violent crimes.
And that's where RCT tries to add some nuance by splitting the criminal decision-making process into two key parts. They call it the decision split.
Okay, what are the two parts?
So they divide it into involvement decisions and event decisions. Involvement decisions are broader. They're made before the person even enters a specific setting, and they determine their general criminal readiness.
So that would include their background, their needs, like for money or excitement, and whether they see crime as a viable option in the first place.
Correct. It's deciding, I am willing to steal, generally. That's the involvement decision.
And the event decision.
That happens in the moment. It's about determining the specific circumstances and setting where the crime will happen. It's the moment they ask, is this the right opportunity right now? Is that lock weak enough? Is that person alone?
Even with that split, it still assumes a perfectly calculating brain, which we know isn't true for anyone, let alone someone acting under stress or, the influence of drugs or alcohol.
And this is acknowledged through the concept of bounded rationality. RCT does recognize that actors don't have perfect knowledge. They're working with limited, sometimes distorted information. Or they might be hyper-focused on one narrow thing, like the immediate cash reward, while completely ignoring the major risks. The theory maintains that even with that imperfect information, the process itself is still rational relative to the actor's immediate goals.
But I want to linger on this critique of pure rationality. If crime is often a routine activity, a drug dealer working a territory, a shoplifter with a regular route, doesn't habit just completely undermine the idea that they're stopping to calculate costs and benefits every single time?
It absolutely does, and this is maybe the deepest flaw in using RCT as the primary action mechanism for RIT. The failure to account for automatic or habitual processes is it's critical.
So what does that mean, habituation?
Traditional habituation refers to the automation of action decisions. Once an environmental trigger is pulled, the sight of an unlocked door, a certain time of night, the person skips over any rational deliberation about consequences and dives straight into the action.
So we have a theory of crime based on routine activities, but the mechanism used to explain it relies on intensive, conscious calculation.
That's the fundamental mismatch we keep seeing.
Right.
If you've committed the same crime dozens of times, the decision to do it again is less a calculation and more just an automated response to a stimulus. This profound mismatch is why many criminologists now see RCT as useful for certain high-level organized crimes like, say, sophisticated fraud, but highly problematic for the impulsive volume crimes that affect most neighborhoods.
Yet, despite those critiques, RCT is the foundation for some of the most successful, practical crime reduction strategies out there. Situational crime prevention, or SCP. This model kind of sidesteps the difficult why question and just focuses purely on manipulating the environment to make crime a less rational choice, regardless of the person's true motivations.
And this is the real-world power of the RCT framework. It's practical. It targets opportunity, which is the one variable we can actually control. The sources detail 5 major strategies that come from this applied model.
Let's run through them with some tangible examples, because this is where the theory becomes super relevant to, all of us.
Okay, first, increase effort. This just makes the crime physically harder to do. We're talking about basic deterrence, installing security doors, strong locks, reinforced glass, or using car immobilizers.
So if a car thief has to spend 2 minutes instead of 20 seconds, the risk of getting caught goes up, and the effort just isn't worth it.
Precisely. Second is about increasing visibility and the threat of being caught.
That would be increased risks.
Right. This is the world of CCTV, alarms, GPS tracking, and crucially, visible, capable guardians like police or active neighborhood watch programs. The famous example of improved street lighting falls here.
Because it's not like the light physically stops the crime.
No, but it increases the visibility of the offender, which raises their perceived risk.
So improving visibility is a highly rational environmental change that affects the offender's calculus, whether they're a career criminal or just an impulsive teenager. What about the third strategy?
Third is reduced rewards. This lowers the potential payoff or makes the stolen goods unusable. Think property marking engraving your serial number on a laptop. That makes it harder for a fence to sell.
Or promoting cashless systems on public transport? That gets rid of cash robbery opportunities for bus drivers.
Absolutely. And that applies perfectly to cybercrime, too, where reducing the reward might mean making data useless by encrypting it. The fourth strategy is reduce provocations.
So minimizing situations that might trigger impulsive, often emotionally charged offending.
Exactly. Managing cues efficiently to avoid frustration that leads to assault, controlling noise levels in bars, or clearly marking seating in stadiums to prevent conflicts.
And the final one, which seems more targeted at taking away excuses or moral justifications.
That's remove excuses. This focuses on making the moral dimension crystal clear. Putting up no trespassing signs or clearly defining property boundaries removes the offender's ability to claim they didn't know or it was an accident. It's about clarifying the moral rules of the setting.
So these 5 strategies, coming from that core idea of making crime a less rational choice, really show the model's power in the real world.
I do.
But to truly understand crime causation, particularly that high propensity element that RIT struggled with, we need a theory that integrates both the opportunity, the setting, and the human element, the rule-guided person.
Right, and that's the challenge that situational action theory, or SAT, attempts to meet.
Okay, so we need to move beyond just opportunity and look at the actual mechanism of action.
We do. And SAT is positioned as a more realistic and constructive alternative. It specifically aims to integrate personal propensities and environmental inducements into a proper action theory that's rooted in rule-guided behavior.
So how does SAT define the mechanism that actually links the person and the place to the criminal act? What is its core mechanism?
It centers on a perception choice process. The theory says that the individual is the source of their actions, but the immediate causes are situational. An action results from the dynamic interaction of 2 elements.
And those?
Their individual's personal moral rules, their propensities, their internal moral compass, and the moral rules of the setting, so the environmental inducements and their enforcement or lack thereof.
So the setting provides the environmental rulebook,
Mhm.
and the person brings their personal rulebook. And crime happens when these rulebooks align in a dark way.
Precisely. Acts of crime happen because the individual, in that specific moment and place, either perceives the criminal act as a morally acceptable alternative, and there's no deterrent, or they fail to adhere to their own personal morals.
Which is a failure of self-control.
A failure of self-control when they're externally incited to act otherwise.
This is a huge philosophical shift from RCT. Instead of assuming humans are driven by pure, self-interested utility maximization, SAT says we are fundamentally rule-guided creatures.
That is the core distinction. SAT asserts that all people share a natural inclination to be rule-guided, to act in accordance with their personal rules and the norms of the settings they're in.
So it's not denying that people seek gain or avoid costs.
Not at all. But it says they do so within the context of rule-guided choice. It really challenges the idea that self-interest is the sole engine of human behavior.
And it forces us to focus on that initial step you mentioned earlier, the step of perception.
Yes. Criminological theories often focus only on the choice between alternatives, and they neglect the crucial first step of perceiving the alternatives to choose from in the first place.
I see. So if an individual's moral framework makes crime just unthinkable,
Then even when they're presented with a perfect opportunity and no guardianship, they won't even perceive crime as an available alternative. SAT embeds that perception of crime as an alternative directly into the person-environment interaction.
and this more detailed model gives us a robust framework for explaining some of the statistical realities about crime, like why it's so highly concentrated.
It connects the dots perfectly. Crime is highly skewed. The sources cite studies, including the famous Wolfgang cohort study from Philadelphia, which showed unequivocally that a small minority of people, sometimes only 6 or 7% of a cohort, are responsible for the vast majority of crimes committed.
That's the personal propensity part, the inherent risk.
And that propensity meets what's called differential criminogeneity.
In plain English,
Places where the rules encourage crime, whether through weak enforcement, clear opportunity, or dominant moral norms that accept or even reward illegal behavior. We see cryo concentrated in space and time, the hotspots.
so a proper explanation has to take into account both the person and the place.
Exactly. Differential crime propensity, the person, and differential criminogeneity, the place. SAT ties the two together.
Okay, so we've established that action is dictated by a perception choice process, influenced by both context and moral rule following. But if propensity is so highly skewed, with this tiny minority committing most of the crimes, we have to spend some real time on the person side of the equation. Why do some individuals have a higher criminal propensity than others, regardless of the setting?
This moves us into neurocriminology, examining the biological and psychological roots of that propensity. And the most robust, best replicated finding from brain imaging studies is that antisocial and violent behavior correlates with reduced functioning in the frontal lobe.
The frontal lobe is the brain's CEO, right? It handles inhibitory control, long-term planning, decision-making, all the essential functions you need to stop yourself from doing something stupid or harmful.
It is absolutely critical. A meta-analysis of imaging studies identified the largest structural and functional reductions in specific frontal lobe regions of antisocial individuals. We should probably list the three key areas and what their impairment means in the real world.
Please do. We need to link the physiology to the behavior.
Okay. First, we see reductions in the orbitofrontal cortex, or OFC. This area is heavily involved in emotion processing, risk assessment, and learning from reward and punishment.
So if the OFC is impaired, the person struggles with empathy or remorse, and they can't adjust their behavior after being punished. They literally fail to learn from their mistakes.
Which explains the recidivism cycle so many offenders fall into.
Right.
Second, the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC. This region is vital for error processing, conflict monitoring, and inhibitory control. Dysfunction here translates directly into impulsivity, the inability to stop an action once the motor impulse has begun. This is that failure of self-control we talked about with SAT.
And finally, the region that handles the long game.
The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or DLPFC. This controls more complex self-regulatory processes like working memory and planning. Reduced functioning here means poor foresight, difficulty considering long-term consequences.
So when these three, the OFC, ACC, and DLPFC, are impaired, the very machinery required for rational, rule-guided behavior is basically broken.
It's fundamentally broken. That's a staggering insight, that biology is so deeply involved. And furthermore, there's evidence that acquired damage, not just developmental issues, can increase risk.
That threefold increase is staggering. Does the source material give any insight into why a brain injury would cause this?
It connects directly to that failure of impulse control. A longitudinal study in Sweden looked at over 230,000 individuals and documented a threefold increase in violent crime after a traumatic brain injury, even after adjusting for other factors.
What?
The trauma, particularly if it happens earlier in life, often damages those self-regulatory areas of the frontal lobe. The brain injury compromises the physical basis for moral deliberation and inhibitory control, making them much more susceptible to the criminogenic elements of their environment.
Now we move to the generational element, the idea that nature has a powerful and often uncomfortable role to play. The sources give a very stark, real-world example of this in the story of Jeffrey Landrigan.
The case of Jeffrey Landrigan is cited specifically because it's a clean, real-life adoption design that separates genetic influence from the rearing environment. Landrigan was adopted at birth into a loving, professional, middle-class family.
So by all accounts, he was provided the best nurture possible.
The best. Yet, he struggled profoundly drug use at 10, burglary arrests at 11, and eventually 2 homicides that led to a death sentence.
And the shocking revelation, separated by decades, was that his biological father was also a death row inmate with a history of career criminality, drug abuse, and 2 killings.
Yes. And the source notes Landrigan was a 4th-generation criminal. His grandfather was an institutionalized criminal shot dead by police, and his great-grandfather was a notorious bootlegger. It's a dramatic, tragic example that strongly suggests a powerful genetic contribution.
So positive child rearing, while crucial, can't entirely negate innate high-propensity traits.
It seems it cannot.
So we have the neurological risk factors and the genetic predispositions. Let's integrate the psychology. The sources connect evil, intentional destructiveness, and callousness to specific personality profiles, specifically something called the dark dyad.
The dark dyad is a toxic combination of narcissism and psychopathy. These traits are the perfect engine for intentional harm.
How so?
Narcissism provides the belief in superiority, entitlement, grandiosity, the belief that the rules don't apply to them or that they are owed something. And psychopathy provides the manipulative ability, the callous insensitivity, and the lack of conscience needed to act on that entitlement without any remorse.
And this callousness is crucial because it allows the offender to align their personal moral rules, or their lack of them, with the criminal act, making it seem acceptable under SAT's framework.
Precisely. If you feel no empathy, the cost-benefit analysis shifts dramatically in your favor, and the sources confirm that underlying cytological issues are endemic in prison populations. One study found that an astonishing 87.3% of women and 83.3% of men had a recognized personality disorder when they committed their crime.
And linking this to trauma, we see how environmental nurture, or the lack of it, interacts with these predispositions.
Prolonged trauma and abuse during childhood can force an offender to adopt emotional detachment as a coping mechanism. This psychological buffer allows them to disconnect not only from the emotional pain of their past, but also from the feelings associated with committing the crime itself.
This brings us to the perennial socioeconomic debate. Is crime driven by poverty and necessity, or by choice, greed, and thrill-seeking? This generates extremely polarized views.
It creates a fascinating division in perspective. On one side, sociologists and advocates see the clear systemic link. Poverty induces desperation, which leads to crimes of necessity, stealing food, medicine, essentials. This is highly irrational if the benefit is survival.
But those on the front lines, like police or prosecutors, often report a different reality, focused on the immediate motivation.
They do. Many professionals cited in the sources argue that they rarely see crime committed purely out of necessity. They suggest the immediate motivation is often for the thrill of it, the pursuit of psychic rewards, the excitement or status gained, or simply due to greed and laziness.
The rich kid shoplifting a luxury item for the adrenaline rush.
Or the young man dealing drugs not because he's starving, but because he sees it as the fastest route to a certain status or income level. It reinforces that RCT idea that crimes are purposive acts for benefit, but that benefit is often social or psychological status, excitement, rather than just pure economic profit.
That is a comprehensive look at the offender side of the equation. Now, let's make that crucial transition from the psychological mechanisms of the offender to the survival mechanics of the potential target. We need to talk about the human technology designed to predict danger.
Intuition.
This is where we empower the listener. The sources, drawing heavily from specialized safety concepts, describe fear not as a weakness or a character flaw, but as a critical ally. It's a brief, instinctual survival signal meant to compel immediate protective action. It's an infallible early warning system.
And we need to draw a clear line between that instinctual, powerful ally and its less useful cousin, worry.
That distinction is vital. Fear is brief and present, responding to a real survival-level threat right now. Worry, on the other hand, is a prolonged state about possible, often low-probability future events.
And worry clouds our judgment. It does. Cognitive dissonance, the conflict between what we know and what we feel, causes people to focus on unusual, sensationalized risks, like shark attacks, while constantly overlooking the common, everyday dangers. The suspicious man who keeps appearing on your street, the persistent suitor who ignores your boundaries.
We prioritize the spectacular risk over the mundane, imminent one.
And when it comes to trusting your gut, the source makes a very strong claim. It says intuition is always right in at least two important ways. First, it is always in response to something, a cluster of subconscious cues your mind has processed. And second, it always has your best interests at heart.
So it's all our past experiences, pattern recognition, subtle body language cues, all feeding into a rapid assessment system.
Correct. The moment you override that signal, ignoring the urge to cross the street because you don't want to seem rude, is often the moment danger escalates. The most dangerous time is when your intuition says run, but societal pressure says be polite.
That idea of context being king applies immediately when we move to one of the most stressful predictions a person can face: evaluating a verbal threat.
Absolutely. The general public mistakenly focuses almost entirely on the content, the specific alarming words, rather than the necessary context. The sources stress that context is the link that gives meaning to everything observed.
So the example of a man carrying guns. The object is terrifying, but the context, he's an on-duty police detective, immediately shifts the threat evaluation.
Right. You prioritize the surrounding circumstances over the literal content. And we also have to distinguish between a true threat and an intimidation. A threat is an unconditional statement of harm. I am going to kill you, period.
Unconditional. No escape clause.
And intimidation is conditional. It uses language like if or else unless, like an extortion threat. If you don't pay me $10,000, I will expose you.
And crucially, the sources note that the individual who favors words often prefers words that alarm over actions that harm.
That's the statistical trend. The recommended response is never to show the threatener a high appraisal of their words or show fear. That just empowers them. Remaining calm, assessing the context, and refusing to engage emotionally diminishes their power.
Let's discuss one of the most common and terrifying forms of unwanted persistence: stalking and domestic violence. The media often glorifies relentless pursuit in romance, which must confuse people's understanding of dangerous persistence.
This is a major area where social conditioning fails us. Persistence, the refusal to accept rejection, is frequently glorified in popular media, but in reality, it is a major pre-incident indicator of stalking and domestic
And
violence.
most stalking involves known individuals, not strangers.
Exactly. The stalker fundamentally refuses to accept rejection because they feel entitled to the target's attention or affection.
So how does the safety advice apply here? We heard that ambiguity is the enemy of safety.
You must prioritize clarity over politeness. Vague rejections, trying to let him down easy, are easily misinterpreted by that entitled mindset as hope or negotiation.
So you have to be direct.
The victim must communicate a clear, decisive, and final no, followed by absolutely no further engagement. Any form of communication can be perceived as an invitation to continue.
We have to address a really complex and controversial point raised in the sources relating to legal interventions, specifically restraining orders.
This requires a highly nuanced discussion. While restraining orders are a necessary legal tool, the sources caution that they can, in some cases, be a significant catalyst for extreme violence.
How so?
When an abuser's control is legally threatened, it can provoke intense rage, potentially escalating the risk of lethal violence. They sometimes provide a false sense of security, which is the greater danger. The emphasis is placed instead on comprehensive safety measures. Establishing a physical safety plan, utilizing shelters, and employing situational awareness rather than relying solely on a piece of paper to act as a shield.
It's another instance where relying on a legal deterrent might give us a false sense of control over someone who is operating way outside the bounds of rational choice.
Exactly. The abuser is fundamentally concerned with control and power. The restraining order represents the ultimate loss of that control, and for someone with high propensity and poor inhibitory function, that emotional trigger can override any rational cost-benefit analysis.
We've covered physical and psychological safety, but the exact same principles of criminal psychology exploiting trust, fear, curiosity apply perfectly to the digital realm. Let's look at social engineering and cybercrime.
This is a fascinating modern extension of the criminal calculus. In social engineering, cyber attackers target people rather than systems. They exploit basic, predictable human behaviors. The data is clear. The human element is involved in well over half of all cyber attacks. The person was the weakest link.
And the cybercriminals are using those dark dyad-like psychological triggers we discussed, trust, fear, and curiosity, to manipulate us into making an impulsive, irrational choice.
The exploitation relies on three core psychological triggers. First, trust. Attackers use personalized content, a technique called spear phishing, to send emails that establish immediate credibility and familiarity.
Second is the creation of artificial panic.
Fear and urgency. Messages often convey immediate high-stakes threats, account closure, legal action, and overdue invoice. This urgency inhibits rational thinking and compels hasty action without due diligence. The emotional response overrides the prefrontal cortex's ability to think critically.
And the final trigger, which is almost irresistible in our click-driven society, is curiosity.
Curiosity is exploited through clickbait and sensationalized headlines. You won't believe what your neighbor did. This temptation overrides skepticism, leading targets into clicking malicious links.
So what are the defense strategies? It sounds like the core advice is exactly the same as for physical threats.
Yeah.
Slow down, check the context, and trust your skeptical side.
That is the perfect summary. The core defense is to develop and use critical thinking skills and never react emotionally. Attackers rely on the emotional response to short-circuit your rationality.
So scrutinize everything.
Intense scrutiny. Hover over URLs to look for discrepancies like goggle.co versus google.com, and you must verify legitimacy through external means, not the message itself.
Right. Call the vendor directly using a phone number from their official website, not the number in this suspicious email.
Precisely. A legitimate institution, like your bank, will never ask for personally identifiable information via email or text. It's the same logic. Trust your intuition, check the context, and resist the urge to react immediately.
That wraps up a truly comprehensive look at the calculus of crime. We've moved from macro theories of opportunity and rational choice all the way to the granular neurobiological and psychological mechanisms that determine individual propensity.
Ultimately, the sources show us that action is dictated by a perception-choice process influenced by both the external situation and the internal moral compass. The choice to offend, even if it seems impulsive, still follows a pattern of inputs that can be modeled and crucially predicted.
What are the key takeaways you hope our listener leaves with today? The lessons that stick.
I think three ideas resonate strongly across all our source material. First, understanding the criminal mindset is not about seeing offenders as fundamentally alien. The sources remind us that everyone's mind is criminal. We're all capable of criminal fantasies.
Right.
Recognizing this shared humanity, even with violent people, aids in prediction because we can better anticipate motives. Remembering that you never really know about people.
Which connects directly to the second most empowering takeaway: awareness and trust in your internal signals.
Absolutely. Whether against physical violence, a manipulative suitor, or a digital social engineering attack, the highest priority is acknowledging and acting on your intuitive internal signals. Intuition is your brilliant internal guardian, always working in your best interest.
And finally, the necessity of conscious moral choice.
The sources strongly emphasize that we all have a responsibility to make thoughtful moral choices and refuse to be non-interventionist bystanders. The lessons from social psychology and criminology suggest that the line between good and evil is permeable, easily crossed when pressured by situational forces.
It calls us to introspection. If we accept that the ultimate struggle between good and evil takes place inside the heart of every single person, then we also accept the awesome responsibility of conscious moral choice every single day.
We know that altruism, like evil, is readily responsive to situational forces, that the environment can incite us toward compassion just as easily as it can incite us toward violence. Given that the line runs through all of us, what small intentional act of compassion or adherence to your moral rules, a small step toward guardianship, either for yourself or others, will you prioritize today to counteract the regressive forces that can so easily lead us astray? That is the ultimate calculus of choice we all face.
A truly powerful and essential thought to end on. Thank you for guiding us through this challenging but critical deep dive.